Everyone keeps telling you the same equation. Work more, earn more. So you pick up the Thursday closing shift again, third week running. 12 extra hours this month at the same $21 an hour you've made since March. Nobody mentions the other equation, the one that doesn't need your Thursdays at all. It's sitting in an app on your phone right now, doing nothing, saying nothing, quietly worth more than the shift you just closed out. You've heard the phrase pay yourself first enough times that it's basically stopped meaning anything, the way any phrase does once it's been printed on enough motivational graphics. What nobody tells you is what it actually looks like from the inside, on an ordinary Tuesday, when nothing dramatic is happening and the only evidence anything changed is a slightly smaller number in checking and a slightly bigger number somewhere you don't check as often. This is 6 of those ordinary Tuesdays, stacked up over the better part of a year and what they eventually add up to. Act 1. The number that actually counts you. You're back at your desk by 9 the next morning, a headset looped around your neck when Selena from 2 rows over spins her monitor around without being asked. A lease confirmation for a Tesla Model Y, $612 a month, 36 months, nothing down. I just felt like I earned it, she says. And you nod, because you know exactly what that sentence costs to say out loud and exactly what it costs to actually believe. You make $54,000 a year. Selena makes close to the same. You clock the same hours, drink the same burnt break room coffee, got the same 3% letter in January. And for a second, standing there under the fluorescent lights, her car makes it look like she's ahead of you. Then you go back to your desk and open your banking app. And this time, you don't close it after the checking balance loads. You keep scrolling. Savings, $410. The 401k you started when you were hired, matched 3% by the company, sitting at $1,740. Nothing else. No IRA, no brokerage account, nothing outside that one line. You add it up badly in your head, then again on the calculator app, and you land on $2,150. That number sits differently than your paycheck does. Your paycheck passes through you. It arrives and it leaves, rent takes its share and gas takes its share, and the grocery run takes what's left. This number is what's still standing after everyone else has already been paid. This is what you actually keep. You think about Selena's Tesla again, except now you're running different math. Her lease is $612 a month for something worth less every day she drives it off the lot. Your 401k contribution is $135 a month, automatic, invisible. The only bill you have that makes you richer for paying it instead of poorer. Nobody spins their monitor around to show you a retirement balance, but one of those numbers compounds and the other one depreciates the moment the tires touch pavement. The 2026 contribution limit on your plan is $24,500. You're nowhere near it, not on this salary, not yet. But you learned something else scrolling the plan document that afternoon. The combined limit between what you put in and what the company matches is $72,000 a year. You're barely participating. For the first time, participating feels like the whole game, and the lease feels like a costume. Driving home that evening in your 2017 Corolla with 88,000 miles and a dashboard light you've been ignoring since spring, you don't feel behind anymore. You feel like you finally know what you're actually being graded on. It was never the car in the lot. It was never the number that lands and disappears by the 14th. It's the number that stays, which is a problem because right now, most of what's staying isn't growing. Something else with your name on it is eating it alive. You think about Selena again a few days later, not with any resentment, more the way you'd think about someone playing a different game entirely. She'll have a nicer car for 3 years and then hand it back and start again. You'll have a slightly bigger number sitting quietly in an account with a name you barely think about, doing the one thing money is actually supposed to do when you leave it alone long enough. Neither choice is a moral failing, but only one of them is invisible from the outside, and that's exactly why nobody talks about it at the mailboxes. Act 2. The math you finally do. The email's been sitting in your inbox for weeks, subject line gone gray with age. You open it that Sunday night on the couch, a bowl of reheated rice going cold beside you. Discover it. Balance $5,940, APR 24.49%, minimum payment due $148. You know exactly how this balance got built. A security deposit you didn't have cash for, a dental crown in February, a flight home for your cousin's wedding in Tucson that went on the card because the alternative was not going at all. None of it felt reckless in the moment, it felt like living. Your neighbor down the hall, a guy named Owen Petrakis who works nights, mentioned once by the mailboxes that he just pays the minimum and doesn't think about it. He said it's like $140 a month. It's nothing. You nodded politely at the time. Tonight, you actually run the number he never bothered to run. At 24.49%, paying only the $148 minimum, that $5,940 balance takes just over 9 years to clear. You'll pay more than $6,300 in interest alone, more than the debt itself, for the privilege of not thinking about it sooner. You go back through the statement line by line while you're at it, not to feel bad about any of it, just to actually see it laid out instead of guessed at. The security deposit was $1,400, back when you moved in 18 months ago and didn't have a cushion built anywhere. The dental work was $1,180, a crown you put off for a year until the tooth actually cracked. The flight was $612, round trip, booked 3 weeks before the wedding because you kept hoping a cheaper fare would show up and it never did. The rest, a little over $2,700, is smaller charges you can't fully reconstruct anymore. A grocery run here, a car repair there, the kind of balance that doesn't arrive all at once so much as accumulate the way dust does, one afternoon you're not paying attention at a time. The number doesn't feel abstract anymore. It feels like a second rent you agree to without reading the lease. You think about the $135 a month quietly compounding in your favor in the 401k. This card is the same mechanism running backward, same relentless daily math, except instead of building something, it's taking something apart one billing cycle at a time. Owen's "It's Nothing" is actually a 9-year sentence with $6,300 in fees stapled to it. You open a second tab, not to transfer the balance, you don't have the credit for a 0% intro card yet, but to build a real number instead of an imagined one. $5,940 divided by 18 months is $330. That's not comfortable. That's canceling the streaming bundle down to one service. That's brown bagging lunch instead of the delivery app. That's telling Owen's cousin you can't make it to the destination bachelor party in Asheville, a trip you can already feel yourself dreading having to decline. But 18 months at that pace costs you around $1,190 in interest instead of $6,300. You write the number on a sticky note and put it on your laptop, not as motivation, just as a fact you don't want to lose track of again the way you lost 3 weeks not opening that email. You set up the autopay for $330 starting Friday, watch the confirmation load, and feel something closer to dread than relief. $330 a month is real money leaving a paycheck that was already tight before you started tracking it anyway, which is exactly why the cash you don't have yet is about to matter more than it ever has. There's a version of this where you never open the email at all, where the minimum payment just quietly renews itself every month for the better part of a decade, and you never actually feel the $6,300 leave, just a slow erosion you'd never be able to point to a single cause for. That version was genuinely available to you an hour ago, on that couch. You picture it sometime since, not with panic, just as a fork you're glad you noticed before it closed. Act 3. The wall you hadn't built. 3 weeks into the $330 autopay, your Corolla answers a question you didn't ask. The dashboard light stops blinking and just stays lit, solid. And 2 days later, the car won't turn over in the office parking lot at 5:40, the lot already half empty, the sky doing that flat orange thing it does in late fall. The tow driver, a woman named Franny who's been doing this for 9 years and tells you so without being asked, drops the Corolla at a shop off the highway. The diagnosis comes back the next morning. Starter plus a battery that was already living on borrowed time, $580, parts and labor, due before they'll release the car. You have $410 in savings. You had $410 3 weeks ago too, before you started throwing every spare dollar at the card because the card felt more urgent. Sitting in the shop's waiting room, a heater space ticking in the corner, you finally do the math you should have done a month ago. $580 minus $410 is $170 you don't have anywhere except the card you just spent 3 weeks trying to shrink. This is the moment it stops being theoretical. All that talk about interest rates and compounding was true, but it was also just numbers on a screen you could close. This is a car that won't start and a shop that wants cash before 5. This is the difference between an inconvenience and an emergency. And the only thing standing between those two words is whether the money already exists somewhere with your name already on it. You put the $170 on the card. It's the only option in the room. Watching the swipe go through, you understand, not from an article, from the actual feeling in your chest, why the 6 months of expenses advice everyone repeats isn't a savings goal. It's a wall. It's the thing that was supposed to stand between you and this exact swipe, and it wasn't built yet. Your coworker Danielle Cho, 2 desks down, mentioned once that she keeps 4 months of expenses in a high-yield account she calls boring on purpose. You'd filed that under things responsible people do and moved on. Walking out of the shop with a new starter and a slightly heavier card balance, it doesn't sound boring anymore. It sounds like the difference between a bad Tuesday and a bad year. Your monthly expenses, rent, insurance, groceries, gas, land around $1,950. 6 months of that is $11,700, a number so far from your current $410 that it should feel impossible. For a second, it does. But you're not building it this week. You're building the first 100 of it this Friday, the same way the card autopay became real the moment you picked a number and a date instead of a feeling. You open a separate account that same night, before you can talk yourself out of it, and move $60 in. Money you don't technically have room for moved anyway. It isn't the wall yet, it's the first brick. You think about Franny the tow driver a few days later, an odd person to keep thinking about, but she'd mentioned while hooking up the Corolla that she sees the same thing every week. Someone standing in a parking lot doing math they'd never done before, usually over an amount that wouldn't have registered as a crisis to someone with $2,000 sitting untouched somewhere. It's never the big stuff that gets people, she'd said, checking a mirror before pulling out. It's always something around $500-600, every time. You didn't say much back. You were still doing the math in your head. Act 4. The ceiling that isn't actually yours. Monday morning, your manager Reggie Toms pulls you into the small conference room with the blinds that never sit straight and tells you, almost apologetically, this year's raise is 3%, same number as last year. $54,000 becomes $55,620. You do the math before you're back at your desk. After taxes, that's about $38 extra a month, less than what you're already sending to the emergency fund. Reggie isn't the villain about it. That's almost the harder part. He genuinely seems to wish it were more, mentions something vague about the budget coming down from regional, tells you he pushed for 4% and got told no. You believe him. That's what makes the ceiling feel so strange. Nobody in the room actually chose it, and yet everyone in the room has to live inside it anyway, the way weather happens to a whole block regardless of whose porch it's raining hardest on. You sit there staring at your 2 monitors, one slightly dimmer than the other, and something Danielle said weeks ago comes back to you. She'd mentioned, almost in passing, that she picks up freelance claims review for a firm in Denver, remote, a few hours a week, using the same software she uses all day at the office. She'd said, it's not extra work, it's the same work, just not capped by what Reggie decides I'm worth. That distinction sits with you longer than the raise did. Your salary has a ceiling built into it, a percentage Reggie doesn't even set alone, decided somewhere above him in a meeting you'll never sit in. But the actual skill, reading a file fast, writing it up clean, catching what gets missed, doesn't have Reggie's ceiling on it. It only has whatever ceiling you put on it yourself. That night, you open a freelance platform, then a niche staffing site Danielle mentions again over lunch that Wednesday. You build a profile in about an hour, list the 2 systems you know cold, and forget about it for 4 days until a message comes through from a small firm in Idaho. 14 files, $19 an hour, remote, evenings. Not a lot, a few $100s over 2 weeks, done in the 90 minutes after dinner you used to spend scrolling. But it's money with no ceiling attached. No Reggie, no 3%. By the end of the month, between the raise and the freelance files, you've added roughly $290 to what used to just be a salary. For the first time, part of that number came from something Reggie never touched. It's a strange kind of income to hold, the freelance money, because it doesn't arrive with the same rhythm as the paycheck. Some weeks it's nothing because the files don't come in. Some weeks it's more than you expected because they do. You notice yourself checking that account differently than you check the main one, less out of anxiety and more out of a kind of curiosity, the way you'd check the weather in a city you're thinking about visiting. It isn't stable yet, but it's the first income in your life that answers to nobody named Reggie, and that alone changes how you think about the ceiling on everything else. Act 5. The bet you can actually name. The message from Idaho turns into a real offer 6 weeks later. Not more freelance files, a full role at a 4-person startup called Larkspur Analytics, building software to automate the exact work you've been doing by hand for 2 years. The founder, a former claims adjuster named Faye Okonkwo, offers you $48,000, a pay cut from what you make now, plus 0.6% equity vesting over 4 years. You bring the offer to Danielle at lunch, sliding your phone across the table like it might bite her. She reads it twice. "That's a pay cut," she says, which is the exact thing that's been keeping you up since Tuesday. Faye mentions almost offhand that her old boss left a stable adjusting job for something almost exactly like this 6 years ago, and last spring that company sold. Faye's old boss closed out somewhere under $3 million and bought a place outside Boise in the $1.4 million range, the kind of listing you scroll past on your phone at midnight without meaning to. You don't know if Larkspur becomes that. Nobody does. That's the entire point. An asymmetric bet isn't a guess dressed up as confidence. It's a trade where you can name your downside in advance. Here, the downside is $7,620 a year in lost salary, the exact gap between what you make now and what Faye's offering, for 4 years if it never vests into anything at all. That's a number you can survive. It's not the whole Tesla lease Selena still paying off. It's a bruise, not a break. You write both numbers down that same night on the same sticky notepad you use for the card payoff plan, the downside on one line and a rough sketch of the upside on the next, and you notice something you hadn't expected. The downside line takes 1 sentence to describe completely. The upside line, by definition, can't be finished because nobody, including Faye, actually knows where the ceiling is yet. You spent your whole working life inside numbers that could be finished in 1 sentence: a salary, an hourly rate, a 3% raise letter. This is the first one you've been offered that can't be, and some part of you finds that unsettling in a way that takes a few days to recognize as excitement instead of fear. The upside has no ceiling because equity doesn't work the way a paycheck does. Your 3% raise from Reggie was capped the moment it was announced. Faye's 0.6% isn't capped by anything except how big Larkspur gets. And if it gets anywhere close to what her old company did, 0.6% of a number in the millions changes which decade you retire in. You run a number you've never run before that night. 25 times your annual expenses invested is roughly the point where compound growth alone can carry the rest of the way without another dollar from you. Something Danielle once called coast, half joking, the way people joke about things they actually want. At $2,950 a month in expenses, that number lands around $585,000. You are nowhere close, but for the first time, you can see the shape of a path where equity, not another 3% raise from Reggie, is what closes that gap in years instead of decades. You call your mom that week too, mostly to talk about something unrelated, and the offer comes up almost by accident. She's quiet on the line for a second, the particular quiet of someone doing their own math on the other end. Is it stupid, you ask her, half hoping she'll say yes so you don't have to decide. She doesn't. You're 26, she says. You don't have a mortgage, you don't have kids. If there's a year to find out, it's probably this one. It isn't permission exactly, it's just someone else saying the thing you'd already half decided out loud, which turns out to be most of what you needed. You think about the Corolla, the starter, the $330 still leaving your account every month for the card. None of that disappears if you take this job. The bet doesn't erase the ground you're standing on, it just changes what you're standing on it for. You type the acceptance email to Faye at 11:20 that night, read it twice, and send it before you can talk yourself back into safety. Not because you're certain, because you finally understand certainty was never actually on the table, not even in the safe job. Reggie's ceiling was never guaranteed to hold for 10 years either. It just felt that way because nothing had tested it yet. Act 6. The unglamorous part nobody posts about. 5 months into Larkspur, you're in the passenger seat of Faye's Outback, driving back from a client meeting in Fort Collins when her phone lights up on the dash, her mother. She lets it ring out, then exhales in a way that tells you more than the call would have. She's turning 71 in the spring, Faye says mostly to the windshield. I still don't actually know where the paperwork is. You don't say anything at first because you're thinking about your own dad, 66, still working, still the guy who changes his own oil and refuses to talk about money with anyone at the table. You realize somewhere past a county line that you don't know where his will is either. You don't actually know if he has one. That night, you open your laptop, and instead of the freelance dashboard or the card autopay screen, you're looking at something you've never had a reason to look at before: term life insurance quotes. Not because anything happened, because for the first time, something depends on you existing on purpose. Your mom is 5 years from her own retirement, quietly counting, in the way parents do without saying it, on you not needing help, and maybe someday being able to offer some back. You make about $52,000 now between Larkspur and what's left of the freelance work. The number the sites keep repeating is 10 to 12 times your income, which puts you somewhere between $520,000 and $624,000 in coverage. A 20-year term policy through a healthy non-smoker rate runs about $24 a month, less than the refurbished monitor you bought yourself 2 months ago to make the freelance work sustainable. You sit with that for a second. $24 a month is the price of making sure a bad day doesn't become a second tragedy for somebody who loves you. You spend longer than you expect comparing quotes, not because the numbers vary wildly, they don't, but because you keep getting stuck on the questionnaires' blunter questions, the ones about family history and how you'd answer them for a stranger reading a form instead of for yourself. It's a strange kind of paperwork, filling out a document whose entire purpose is a version of the future you're hoping never arrives. You finish it anyway on a Tuesday night in about 25 minutes, and the policy is active by that Thursday. Nothing about your life looks any different from the outside. Nothing about it needs to. You think about Faye's mother and the paperwork nobody's asked about, and you open a new tab. A basic will through an online service runs under $200. One afternoon of answering questions about who gets what and who you'd trust with decisions if you couldn't make them yourself. You don't have much yet. No house, no listing outside Boise, none of that. But you do have a 401k, a small brokerage account slowly filling from the Larkspur equity vesting quietly in the background, and the Corolla that's finally, mercifully, running clean. Somebody should know what happens to all of it if you're not the one explaining it. The harder conversation is the one Faye almost had on the highway. You call your dad that Sunday. Not about money exactly, more circling it, like these calls always start. He deflects twice. The third time, you just ask straight out, "Where's the paperwork? Is there a will? Who do I call if something happens?" He goes quiet for a second, then tells you it's in the fireproof box in the garage, third shelf behind the paint cans. Something in his voice sounds relieved you asked before he had to bring it up himself. He asks about your job before you hang up, the new one, and you tell him about Larkspur, about Faye, about the equity you still can't fully explain the mechanics of when he asks a follow-up question. He doesn't say much back, just that he's glad you're figuring it out, in the same tone he's used since you were a kid learning to parallel park. Not effusive, just steady. You hang up and realize the conversation did two things at once: closed the gap you didn't know was open about the fireproof box, and opened a small one about what you're actually doing with your life now. One your dad seems, in his quiet way, glad to be catching up on. You hang up and sit at your kitchen table, the monitor dark, the street outside doing whatever a Sunday night does in your part of town. Nothing about that call felt like winning. It felt like maintenance, the unglamorous kind nobody screenshots and nobody leases a car to announce. But it's the same quiet mechanism as everything else: the 401k contribution, the $330 auto pay, the $60 into a savings account you didn't have room for. None of it photographs well. All of it compounds anyway, whether anyone's watching or not. If you've been doing even one of these 6 things without anyone clapping for it, you're already further along than your bank app makes it feel. The wealth that lasts was never going to look like a lease. It was always going to look like this: a Sunday phone call, a sticky note on a laptop, a Friday transfer nobody sees. Somewhere down the line, maybe a year from now, maybe 5, one of these ordinary Tuesdays is going to matter more than it looks like it matters right now, standing at the kitchen table with a dark monitor and a phone call still settling in your chest. You won't know which one until it does. That's sort of the entire deal. Subscribe if you want the next one, and I'll see you there.